This is Top of Mind. I'm Julie Rose. Thanks for tuning in. Today's episode has been carefully curated from the Top of Mind archive, and there's a lot to choose from. We've been going in depth with guests on the air every weekday since 2015, searching for new perspectives and ideas. I hope what you hear today makes you think about your world a little differently and sparks satisfying new conversations with the people in your life. Let's dive in. Jason Ramos has been a wildland firefighter for 27 years, much of that time spent with an elite unit that parachutes out of airplanes to fight fires. A few years ago, he wrote a book about his experiences called Smoke Jumper, a memoir by one of America's most select airborne firefighters. And Jason Ramos is on the line. Thanks for taking time today. Hello.
Hi, Julie. How are you? It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Tell us about smoke jumpers, the folks who jump out of airplanes with parachutes. When do they get called in to fight the fire?
Well, they're definitely, they're an amazing group. Men and women that have been doing this dating back to 1939. And basically what they are is they're problem solvers. They're going to get a call and insert via parachute is most of the time what they use. And they're going to be dropped off somewhere, usually in the Pacific Northwest, the lower 48, also Alaska, into a very austere setting. And they're going to go fix that problem, whether it be a small fire is usually their forte, lightning strikes. But they can also assist and do a lot of work on large fires. So they're some of the highest trained wildland firefighters on the planet. They're just... the amount of training they go through, it's just a very special bunch.
It does seem awfully risky, though, to jump out of a plane into a fire zone with a parachute and there's trees below you. Like, it does seem. Well, I mean, is there ever a reason? Like, why wouldn't they just send people in on the ground to do that work?
Well, it goes back, like I said, 1939. So, from the 1910 fires, it takes a long time sometimes when you get a fire to get out there, whether it be in the wilderness, hours and hours and sometimes days of hiking in to fight a fire. So that's what was given to them back then. And the time you get there, you can imagine you're tired, you're hungry, you're exhausted, and then you have to go to work.
Yeah.
So
this would be often the
inaccessible.
This would often be the inaccessible places of a fire where there isn't a road or there's not, an easy overland access.
Correct. And we also support folks where, let's say, you're in a part of California where a fire engine might take hours to get up a Forest Service road, where a jump plane can be there in, 10 minutes, half hour versus hours. So we can insert very quickly. And again, we're problem solvers. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox to help support force multiplier to help anyone on the ground or also tackle the mission by ourselves.
What do you mean a lot of tools in your toolbox?
So the jumpers, think of the plane as a shopping cart. Think of the plane as like they just loaded up at Costco or a hardware store, right? So they have anywhere from 8 to 10, 12, depending on the size of the plane, of smoke jumpers. And then they have all the food, water, chainsaws, hand crosscut saws, and more extra tools to accomplish their job. So once they jump out, they can pull the resources from that plane. And then once the plane leaves, they're set for about 48 hours to be self-sufficient.
You're jumping out of a plane with all of that equipment in your arms?
So we'll jump out first, and the jumpers are wearing nowadays, they're wearing anywhere from 65 plus pounds, depending on where they're at the time of the year. And then after that, the plane will drop down what we call our cargo boxes, our food boxes, chainsaw boxes, and those are going to range anywhere from 90 to 100 pounds. And that's going to be our supply. And then once the fire is done, everything that plane dropped out, right? Everything they gave you from that shopping cart needs to be packed out. So that's where the job really starts. They're going to be packing out anywhere from 110 pounds or more on their back.
Why can't the plane just come back and pick up the stuff?
I wish they could. I wish they could land. I wish we had runways out there. We're not allowed to make runways for them. So usually, again, remember where we're jumping is very austere terrain. So timbered terrain, rocks, cliffs. So there is no runway for miles and miles and miles. So that's where the smoke jumpers come in. We can insert very quickly, but when the job is done, we do have to pack that gear. And if we're lucky, we can pack to a near a helicopter site. Helicopter can come pick us up, but that usually doesn't happen all the time. So pack mules happens in some states, but most of the times you're going to use your legs and you're going to hike out.
Wow. So smoke jumpers have to be able to carry a lot on their backs. They have to be very, I guess, strong and fit.
Correct.
Also, you have to be willing to jump out of a plane, which is an extra skill.
Yeah, it's definitely I didn't like heights, right? When I told my dad I was going to go try out for smoke jumping, he says, "Son," he kind of laughed. He says, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." So there's definitely some, whatever you want to call it, soul searching, or looking inside your deeper soul, whatever everyone has, their own definition of that, but it will definitely find out if you can do it or not. If you cannot pass all the requirements in that 4 to 6 weeks of training, you do not become a smoke jumper. And that just doesn't stop there. It keeps training, keeps going. It just keeps going and going. You have to be able to perform satisfactory at all those skills.
You also have to be a trained and experienced fighter of wildland fires as well. Like there's that skill set, plus there's the pack out skill, plus there's the jumping out of the plane skill.
Correct. So when you come to us, if you apply, like if you wanted to apply to become a smoke jumper, you'd have to be already experienced in wildland firefighting. And that's going to be a minimum 1 year, which 1 year to us is 2 fire seasons, 6 months being a season. So you're looking around minimum 2 years before you can even apply to meet the requirements to test out as a rookie smoke jumper. So you're going to have all that. We don't teach you how to become a wildland firefighter in the program. We don't have time for that. So it's, again, 4 to 6 weeks just to teach you how to manipulate and fly a parachute, and then other training on top of that. So a very fast course that just never stops. Training always will continue as a smoke jumper.
Now, Jason Ramos, tell us about the jumping and the landing, the parachute manipulation piece of this, because I'm picturing, like you've described, you're jumping into a Pacific Northwest timber forest. If there's no room for a plane or a helicopter to land, how the heck are you going to land a parachute without getting hung up on the trees?
Correct. So, for all the listeners out there, kind of imagine if you think of a knight's armor back in the day on horses, instead of it being shiny metal, we're wearing a soft armor. So it resembles a knight's armor and padded from head to toe. And then we have a bunch of things on us, obviously parachutes and our personal gear bag. And we got big leg pockets for let down rope. Per your question that you just asked, a lot of times that you could land in a tree and you're going to have your let down rope, which you can rappel out of the tree. You have 150 foot and to rappel down safely to the ground. So that does happen at times.
You might actually do it on purpose. Like base, that would be the strategy to land in a tree.
Correct. Yeah. If you're coming in, right, and you see rocks and cliffs and boulders in a place that you don't want to land, but you have some nice fluffy trees there, you're probably going to take the tree. And that's a whole other skill set is too, you got to slow down and land in the tree. You don't want to be hitting that tree like a cartoon character and, things hurt. So,
well, yeah, you're going to hit branches. And I mean, it's not like you just sort of slide down in between the trees. I imagine you're hitting branches and leaves and stuff is smacking you in the face. You have to just sort of like curl up into a ball or something. There must be like a landing posture.
Well, yeah, we have a PLF when we do parachute landing, fall or roll, but we have full helmet, face masks. So we're pretty protected, but there is some protocols. If you do it right, it's kind of like putting, an ornament on top of a Christmas tree. If you do it right, you cap the tree perfectly, and it's very soft. If you do it wrong, or you kind of made some wrong decisions there, it could hurt, and you could get impaled. You could get seriously injured.
Yeah. Well, speaking of injury, this has to be one of the more injury risky jobs in the wildland fighting community.
It is. There's definitely, we have a great safety record. The smoke jumpers, when I came to them, when you first see a smoke jumper, I remember watching them how they tied their shoelaces, how they brushed their teeth, how they swung their fire tools, how they used the chainsaw. And again, years and years and decades and generations of training that put into these folks. And, we do have injuries. I got hurt back in 2013, and I probably won't be jumping anymore due to my back injury. But
It was a
some
back
folks make it their
injury
whole
then,
career.
a back injury from
Yeah.
jumping, or was it from the landing?
The doctors think a little bit of everything.
Mm.
I had they say I had the whooping cough. I had whooping cough back in 2013. They said, I was coughing so hard that year, and just the amount of impacts, it didn't help
Wow.
herniation of my lower back. So
Oh, I'm so sorry.
kind of
That's,
yeah,
yeah.
it's one of those things. If I had to do it all over again, I would. It definitely changed my life, right? I deal with it every day, but I'm still active. But it's something that'll live with me for the rest of my life. There's certain things I don't do as much anymore because your back is not as good as it was. So it's the way it is, and the way what happens.
Smoke inhalation must also be a real risk for all firefighters, I would think, that can cause some lingering damage to the body.
Yes, it can. There's definitely more studies going on, especially in the last few years, with cancer issues and whatnot. Usually, wildland firefighters, if they can, we try to stay out of the smoke. Structure firefighters deal with a lot of the carcinogens and the soot that's on their gear. So even with us, right, we could be in it for 14 days or even a couple days, uh, breathing a lot of smoke. So it's definitely, um, it's not the healthiest smoke, but it definitely can do its damage, as we're learning as years go on with what happens as being a firefighter.
In the 30 odd years you have been fighting wildland fires in the West, Jason Ramos, has the job changed? Have the fires changed?
It has, things are always changing, right? You look back time from whether it be the 1800s to now, or even farther and beyond, right? Things are always dynamic, especially in the fire service. We have different protocols, we have different tools, we have better tools, we have different training procedures, we have better physical fitness. Um, but fire is definitely something that is very dynamic, and the places that we fight fire in are very dynamic with homes. And as more people live in the urban interface,
Mm.
makes it a bigger challenge, as you see in national news every year now.
Do smoke jumpers still have as much of a role if these big fires, the really big ones that require so many resources because there are so many communities nearby? I mean, there are roads. You don't have to parachute into a fire in that case because it's right in the middle of communities, right? Do smoke jumpers still have the level of importance, or is the demand still as high for smoke jumpers in these modern fires that we're dealing with?
Yes, so still thinking the smokers is the highest trained out there. So they have what we call overhead assignments. These folks have a lot of skills. We call it red card qualifications. So they could be incident commanders of some of these large fires that you see on national news. They could be part of that team. Whether you hear on the national news, whether it's a type 1 team or a type 2 team, there can be smoke jumpers that are working for those teams, since they're so highly skilled, to give their forte and their help throughout the summer. So those teams from anywhere from 40 to 50, 60 folks, and they come in and do everything from your logistics, your finance, your food, feeding you if you're hurt. It's a small city. So within those national fires that you see on the news, you still can have smoke jumpers there. They'll drive, they'll get in their vehicle and drive there.
So they're
Or
not
if it's a
jumping.
larger fire out inaccessible,
Mm. So they wouldn't be jumping in those cases, though.
they,
Maybe there's less need for jumping
they,
itself.
they can. I've been on fires where they'll take an incident commander and fly there and drop them off out on a very large fire out in the wilderness. So they'll drop one off, and he'll be transitioned into an incident commander. So again, we're very universal and still doing, whether it be large fires on teams or very special operation tactics throughout the United States.
And even with your injury, you can continue to be involved in the career without actually jumping out of planes.
So right now, I am still signed to the base I'm working at for the fire service, and I'm doing a lot of research and design. So my forte is all the best textiles, kind of like the 007. That's my forte. So doing a lot of work with that. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm active with the local county search and rescue team. So I'm still very capable, but just not jump capable at this point until the doctors, if they ever clear me or they don't clear me. But I'm still very active, especially in search and rescue for the county.
Yeah. Well, Jason Ramos, good luck. Thanks for taking a few minutes to talk with us today about the work that you and so many others do. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Jason Ramos is a wildland firefighter, a former smoke jumper. His book is Smoke Jumper, a memoir by one of America's most select airborne firefighters. This is Top of Mind. I'm Julie Rose. The conversations in today's episode come from the Top of Mind archive. To have you with us today for Top of Mind. I'm Julie Rose. Thanks for tuning in. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a serious astrophysicist, but you wouldn't necessarily know that from his Twitter feed. He is famous for witty quips and plain language explanations of how the universe works.
Welcome to Star Talk, your place in the universe where science and pop culture collide.
On his very popular podcast, Star Talk, Neil deGrasse Tyson has a regular segment where he takes questions from listeners.
Got with me my co-host, Chuck. Nice.
Hey, Neil. What's happening?
All right. I love having you out there, Chuck. We're going to knock out another cosmic queries, but this one, we have to grab the ones that don't fit any categories. So this is just, I think you coined the term galactic gumbo.
Dude, that's my favorite. We call it grab bag. We'll call it a bunch of different things, but my favorite is galactic gumbo.
He's always got a comedian co-host along to keep things light. And these Cosmic Queries episodes of the podcast have become so popular that Neil deGrasse Tyson's now published a book tackling the most confounding questions listeners have asked. Big stuff like, how did it all begin? What is the universe made of? How will it all end? Now, a lot of people would shy away from unanswerable, seemingly impossible questions like that, but Neil deGrasse Tyson thrives on this stuff. And he's with me now to talk about his new book, which is called Cosmic Queries. It's just out from National Geographic. Mr. Tyson, hi there. So fun to get a few minutes with you.
Yeah, thank you. And please call me Neil. And that was a very warm introduction that was. Thank you. I have to live up to that. Okay.
No, hardly. But I do want to actually start with the way you introduce yourself on the podcast. Often this is what people will hear.
This is Star Talk. Neil deGrasse Tyson here, your personal astrophysicist.
So when did you first realize that people might want a personal astrophysicist? Like that would be a thing.
It is a little weird. I decided to start saying that when I started getting letters from people asking me questions that related to their own lives and their own challenges within their own lives and wanted to know if my cosmic insights could then help them through those challenges. And that led to a whole other book called Letters from an Astrophysicist. But over decades, collecting mail such as that, letters from people in prison. I had someone in prison who said he's like the smart guy in prison and he wants to teach other prisoners new concepts. And he wanted to know, what's my secret so that I can be effective because the other prisoners are not paying attention to him. So when I learned that people were thinking of me as sort of their best friend, I realized maybe I could adjust the moniker and just say, I'm your personal astrophysicist. I'm here for you if you have cosmic curiosities. So that's why.
What's one of the questions that you get most often about the universe?
In sequence, the first one is there life out there in the universe? That's number one.
We all want to know
that's a whole
about
chapter.
We all want to know about the aliens. Is there ET out there?
Nobody doesn't love the aliens, okay? So there are a lot of ways to address that. And so there's that one. Then there's what was around before the Big Bang. That's another common one. And usually third, sometimes fourth, is there God? And what's interesting is that anyone would think to ask that question of an astrophysicist, because I think almost all deities we've ever sort of come up with in the history of civilizations, they live or work in the sky, right? Okay, I guess Mount Olympus, it's not the sky, but it's still pretty high up, all right? So that's where all the Greek deities lived. Generally, when you think of gods you worship, God or gods you worship, it is up in the heavens. If you look at Bible posters, right? Posters that have quotes from the Bible, they're typically the sun at a sunset with beautiful rays of light. It's not earthworms, all right? It's not ticks sucking blood out of its host, even though that's still the same earth, right? So this notion that we look up to the universe and attach our divine longings, now I look up in the universe professionally. And so I think people then think or believe that I might have some God insights because I spend my whole professional life looking up where it is the cultural repository of everyone's deities.
And so what do you tell them? What do you tell them when they ask you, is there God, based on your astrophysics insight?
Yeah.
I mean, is that one of those, I don't know.
You're supposed to go through the other two questions first before you get to the God question. You jump in the starting line there. Okay. But I'd be happy to answer. So what I say is, let's consider that human civilization has coexisted with a belief system in gods ever since we've had civilization. So the God thing is not new, it's old. And different religions, interestingly, are certain, especially in the monotheistic religions, are certain that all other religions are false and that they are the one correct religion. And in science, you might see two scientists arguing, debating, but there's a contract that both scientists have signed before they entered the debate. And that is either you're wrong and I'm right, or I'm wrong and you're right, or we're both wrong. We know that in advance. And so the debate happens on that soil, okay? So, and we can't agree, we say, well, I guess we need more data. And then we finish the debate and go out and have a beer. We're not fighting each other. We're not threatening each other. Whereas so many arguments that people get into, they are so certain they are right and they cannot tolerate someone who they are certain is wrong. And if two people feel that way about one idea, that is a recipe for disaster. And in the limit, wars are fought over how strongly you believe in one idea versus another. But you will never see scientists leading armies into battle over a scientific principle. This does not happen. It's, hey, wait, before we kill each other, let's just have that conversation.
Yeah.
And, oh, by the way, we both need more data. Let's go have a beer.
Well, you're really saying, and it sounds like it's the answer to all three of those questions, most common questions that people ask you, we don't know for sure, but here's what we do know. Here's the data that we've collected, and maybe someday we'll know more if we have more data.
Now let's have a beer.
Right.
More specifically to your God question is often when that's asked here in the West, they're referring to the three great monotheistic religions, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all of which use the same basic Bible, all right, what Christians call the Old Testament. So I can tell you this, that if there is a God, and the God is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-loving, the loving part, the God has an unusual way of showing it, right? Given the havoc wrought upon us by nature, all right, with hurricanes and tornadoes and tsunamis and pestilence and disease and birth defects. These are things that nature is throwing at us. And you want to add to that asteroid strikes that have rendered more than 90% of all species that have ever walked the face of this earth extinct. So you want to look at the universe and think of it from the poster as this beautiful, calm, orderly place. When I look at the universe, I see the shooting gallery of asteroids putting life at risk. I see the extinction of other forces operating on Earth. I see nature really just trying to do all it can to kill us. Have you folded that into your religious philosophies? If you have, I'd like to know about that. But if your only answer is, well, God works in mysterious ways, that's not really an answer, right? If you see something beautiful and say that's God putting beauty on earth, and you're claiming to know the mind of God, all right? You're claiming that. God did this because that's a beautiful thing, and God likes me and loves me, and Jesus loves me, so that's why. Then something happens you can't explain. Oh, you're stricken with cancer. Your mother died of breast cancer at age 45. God works in mysterious ways. So those are not equivalent replies to the answer, in what way is God good? All right. So maybe God is either not all good or not all powerful. Am I allowed to ask that question? Because if I'm not, then you're not really probing your faith to the depths that you could. And if you want to ignore all the science, that's fine. We live in a country that protects the free expression of religion. I don't have a problem with that. But if you're going to say, I'm not going to wear a mask because God is going to protect me from this virus, you are not only underinformed, you are misinformed and don't really understand the operations of objectively true phenomenon in nature. And so I would say science can work in the interest of your health, wealth, and security in ways that your religion can't. That's why we're living longer than ever before. That's why I saw a New Yorker comic with cavemen, and they're all sitting around a fire, and one of them says to the other, our animals are free range, our water is pure, our air is clean, yet we're still not living past 35. So, at that point, you got to stop and say, thank you, science. All right. So at some point, can I hear that from somebody, please? All right.
I'm speaking with Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's director of the Hayden Planetarium at New York's American Museum of Natural History. He's host of Star Talk, a very popular podcast. You've probably seen one of his many, many TV specials for PBS and National Geographic. And he's got this new book called Cosmic Queries with National Geographic. And it's tackling some of the very biggest questions that listeners have called in and asked on his podcast, Star Talk. It's all about asking questions, isn't it, for you? I mean, when it really comes down to it, you like to consider the answers and give people what information we already have, but really the asking of the questions is what it seems to really rev your engines.
Thanks for catching that, and I'm glad that was a takeaway for you, because it was something that was put in for it to be a takeaway. The takeaway is the world is not only about answers to questions. The world is also about, have you posed the right question in the first place? All right, some questions, and are those questions emanating from your depths of curiosity and wonder, right? And if so, is the question taking you down a dark alley where there's no end? Or do you think there's an alley there, but in fact there isn't? Or is there some beam of light at the end of the line of inquiry you just established? And I cannot overemphasize that distinction. For example, I can pose a question that you know is just absurd, and so you're not getting funding for science labs to figure it out, such as, what is the square root of a pork chop? All right, that's a legitimate English sentence with nouns and verbs, but it has no meaning at all. And so you know not to ask that question, but let's get a little more subtle, okay? You're visiting Santa Claus, and you say, Santa Claus, I want to go north of here. Which direction should I travel? And because Santa Claus lives on the North Pole, every direction Santa Claus points, every direction is due south. In fact, there is no east or west either. It's just due south. So the question, what is north of the North Pole, a little more subtle than square root of a pork chop, but it has no meaning in a world where there's a North Pole. So when you're on the frontier of inquiry and wonder, there is no guarantee that you have even asked the right question. There's no guarantee that you even know what question you should be asking. So therein is this sort of is the mystery and the wonder of scientific inquiry. And so people ask me, what question do I want answered before I die? And it is the question I don't even yet know to ask. Because I've learned, and as have all scientists, to love the questions themselves.
I'll tell you the questions, the concepts that really bend my mind in ways that I can't. I almost can't really cope with it. are the ones that you tackle right at the very end of the book, Cosmic Queries, and that's this whole idea that of a multiverse, that there might be different. I mean, some of my favorite TV shows have talked about, different timelines, different concepts of time, like The Good Place and Community, or the idea of the Spider-Man movie with the multiverse and the Spider-Men that came from other realms, but not realms. The whole idea that there could be other people, other societies in other parallel universes existing right alongside us somehow really, really bends my mind. Is that complete science fiction, people imagining things, or is there any scientific basis for that idea?
No, that's good. And in fact, so many seeds of science fiction storytelling actually began in real science. So to take antimatter, for example, that's a favorite fuel of science fiction rockets, but the concept was developed by a physicist. It was finally discovered in a laboratory. We won a Nobel Prize for that. And it's a real thing. And then you go to the movie, not the first of the Dan Brown stories, but the second one. Was it Angels and Demons? And it was a movie. The Vatican has this vial of antimatter, and if it gets out, it would destroy the world. It's like, we make antimatter all the time. It's like, could you learn a little science first before you write this story? And so the storytelling at its best would be anchored in something real, or at least real on paper. And the multiverse has very real justification to talk about scientifically. And there's basically a whole chapter related to it. Now, you said you've seen TV shows, series, movies that invoke a multiverse and people move among the multiverses. That would be the simplest of the multiverses. The simplest of the multiverses is there's a whole other universe that you can't get to, or you need special ways to access it, yet the laws of physics are the same. Okay, that's the simplest that's like level 1 multiverse, okay, or level 0 multiverse. There are other multiverses that can be imagined using quantum physics and relativity and established science. So another multiverse might be, okay, it's the same laws of physics but has different initial conditions. So the universe unfolded very differently from ours. So it looks really different. There's a different mixture of matter and energy. So maybe it has more stars or very few stars or no stars at all. Now let's go to another level of multiverse where the laws of physics are different. That would be really dangerous to visit. Because if the charge on the electron that's holding your molecules together is different, you step through that portal, you collapse into a pile of goo, for example. So you want to take a coin with you and flip it to the other flip it across the proscenium to check to see what happens to it before you make the step yourself. So these are different levels. And so some questions that we pose in our own universe might not have meaning in those other universes because the laws of physics don't even permit it. I'll give an example, and it's even in the book. The book is sprinkled with tweets that I posted that happen to relate to the flow of content. So here's one, all right? So if Pinocchio, and this is the pop culture referencing that is the DNA of Star Talk that is uplifted into this book. The goal is to make it fun and interesting to read and to follow. So if Pinocchio uttered the sentence, "My nose is about to grow," what would happen? Tell me now. What would happen?
Well, I don't. I mean, it could grow, or maybe it wouldn't grow.
No, but if it grows, that meant he was telling the truth.
So
but it only grows when he's lying. It only grows
when he's lying. So it couldn't grow.
But if it doesn't grow, that meant he was lying about his nose, and his nose should grow.
Should grow.
This is my point. Okay, so that's a legitimate English language sentence, but that very concept has no meaning in Pinocchio's universe. Pinocchio would never say that because he can't, because it doesn't have any meaning, any more than asking Santa Claus, "Send me north today." He knows not to ask that question because make that statement because that statement has no meaning. So if you go multiverse hopping, into these higher level multiverses where the laws of physics are different, it's a wild west. All bets are off. How to even pose questions in that universe. So yeah, the book takes you there and sort of dangles you over the precipice of our ignorance, but informed by the landscape of our knowledge, so that you can appreciate the challenges we face as we ask questions on that frontier of inquiry.
The book is called Cosmic Queries. It's out now from National Geographic. Neil deGrasse Tyson is director of the Hayden Planetarium, host of Star Talk, lots of TV specials on PBS and National Geographic. Wow, it has been really a treat talking with you, Neil. Thanks a lot for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
This is Top of Mind. I'm Julie Rose. More great conversations from the Top of Mind archive are coming up.
Thank you for listening to Top of Mind. I'm Ciara Hewlett. The wasp. What a universally hated little creature. But at the barbecues this summer, you might want to rethink killing that wasp buzzing around the fruit salad. A group of scientists in the UK are trying really hard to give the wasp some good PR and get us to like them. In fact, they want us to love the insect. Their research shows how wasps are actually vital to ecosystems. Sarian Sumner is one of those scientists. She's a professor of behavioral ecology at University College London. She joins me on the line now. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello, thanks for having me.
What would happen if all of the wasps were just to boom, die right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, probably a lot of bad things. I mean, most people would be thinking, well, I can't think of anything better than having no wasps around bothering me at my picnic. But I would throw the question back at you and say, what do you think would happen if there were no bees, if all the bees went extinct? And you would immediately say, oh my goodness, what's going to pollinate our crops? What's going to pollinate our wildflowers? We need the bees. They're really important as pollinators. And I think most of your listeners would probably agree with that. So let's now look at the wasp. And the wasp is just as useful in the ecosystems as something like the bee, because they are really important as nature's pest controllers. So they hunt other insects, possibly even insects and other arthropods that you might hate almost as much as the wasp, maybe spiders or something, or flies. They hunt those prey and they will either, in order to feed their brood. And so a world without wasps would be one where there are lots of other invertebrate populations going unchecked. And so there'd be a lot more of other things like flies and spiders if it weren't for the wasps.
Ooh. And then they're also pollinators like bees. And so some types of plants would die out?
Well, probably not actually. I mean, wasps do pollinate, but not nearly to the same degree as bees. Having said that, there are a few wasp relationships with plants which are obligate. So the plants rely entirely on the wasp for pollination. And these are certain types of orchids. And so some of these orchids have evolved to mimic the backside of a female wasp.
What?
And so it's the male wasp that gets attracted to the orchid because he thinks that looks like a very sexy looking female, and he wants to mate with her. And so in the process of trying to mate with the flower, the flower dobs a bit of pollen onto the male wasp, and then he'll go on to the next flower that was also mimicking, of the same species, is going to be mimicking the female wasp, and so on. In doing so, he pollinates the plants. And then there was also some other flowers that will mimic the smell of a female wasp as well, in the same way to deceive the male wasps.
It's so fascinating how plants and other creatures will evolve just to survive like that. That's That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
it's a fabulous example of co-evolution, actually, and how, the evolution, the orchid will have been under very strong evolutionary selection to look like, to be a really good mimic of a female wasp. And obviously, the better that they were at mimicking a female wasp, the better that they were at attracting a male wasp, and so the more pollination success they had. And so, whatever genetic basis it was that made them really good at mimicking a female wasp will be propagated through the population.
Okay, so if wasps were to just die out, we'd have a lot more other gross creatures like spiders and other insects, and we'd lose some flowers like orchids or other plants. But still, with the fact that they sting and they are so annoying, it seems like a really tall order to ask people to love the wasp.
Well, I think it's important to say that it's only, all bees sting, or apart from the stingless bees in South America, all bees do sting as well. Okay, so it's not just wasps that sting. And apart from the honeybee, all bees will keep on stinging you. They don't leave their sting in you. They don't sting you once and then they're dead. And just like a wasp. So people often think that if they've got stung lots of times, they go, oh, it was a wasp. But they don't know it was a wasp. It could have been a bee. It was equally likely to be a bee. And so I think that's just one thing to say. And then the other thing to say is that the reputation of wasps as being out to get you and bothering you at your picnic and, trying to sting you is purely based on the reputation of a very small proportion of the species of social wasps. So these are the yellow jackets and the hornets that you might recognize at your barbecue. And there are only 50 to 60 species of those types of wasps, whereas overall there are at least 33,000 species of wasps that can sting, of stinging wasps. So it's just a very small proportion of those stinging wasps that give wasps such a bad reputation, which I think is terribly sad.
At what point did you start to love the wasp? How did that happen?
It was kind of accidental. I guess I've always wanted to be a zoologist ever since I was, a teenager. So I always loved nature and I was very interested in animal behavior. But I have to confess that I didn't really like wasps and generally insects, creepy crawlies. I was into bird watching rather than, entomology. But then I started studying wasps because they were a really good model for studying social behavior. And so my PhD was on wasps, and I remember very clearly at the time, and my soon-to-be PhD supervisor, I was having a meeting with him and I said, well, I don't really like wasps, they're going to sting me. And he said, oh, no, don't worry, these wasps don't sting, you'll be fine. And of course I believed him because I was naive. Of course the wasps stung. These were actually these lovely little hover wasps from Malaysia. So they do have a sting, like all stinging wasps, but really they don't sting you unless they drop down your neck or something and get onto very soft skin. And even then it's only a little tickle. So they were like an entry-level wasp. They were a very good wasp to start working on, and I just got hooked by watching their behavior and realizing how fascinating they were, because each of these are like tiny little colonies of these social wasps. So they're a bit like a meerkat society, actually, because they're cooperative breeders. They all live together in a group, but they're all capable of being reproductive. But nonetheless, they have an individual on the nest who is the queen, the dedicated reproductive, and then the rest are her workers. And so they're a brilliant model for trying to understand the early stages of sociality. So it's really tiny nests that we were watching, and you can paint each wasp individually, so you've got their identification. It's like name tags. And then you watch the wasps and you observe their behaviors, and you can remove wasps and see how they respond to different losses of different group members. It's just like a soap opera. It's like the best it's better than TV.
Okay, but why do you care so much about people liking or even hopefully loving the wasp? Does it really do anything when people Occasionally they'll kill one with, some rolled up newspaper. Well, I guess people don't really have newspapers anymore, but with whatever they have, or, and they might hate them and, run away from them. Or why does it matter if people do that and people don't like the wasp?
Well, I think it all comes down to, the main role that that they have in the ecosystem is as this population regulator of other insects. And as I said, in the same way that if we lost all the pollinating insects like bees and hoverflies and butterflies, we'd be we'd have some trouble on our hands. We'd have to be hand pollinating crops in order to have food. And in the same way, wasps provide us with this sort of insect regulation service, and lots of the insects that they eat are agricultural pests. So there'll be things like caterpillars. Caterpillars is one of the main agricultural pests that that causes billions of dollars worth of crop losses every year. And wasps are a really important part of reducing those populations. And they are also really important in just your everyday gardening. So in your garden, if you had a wasp nest in your garden last year, then by having those wasps in your garden and tolerating them, it will mean that you don't have to use pesticides to kill the pests on your crops, like caterpillars on your vegetables and aphids on your tomatoes. So potentially wasps are one of those facets of nature that we've really overlooked, but that could be one step towards a more sustainable way of living and reducing our reliance on these chemicals, which are otherwise being very detrimental to the environment.
I'm speaking with Sarian Sumner. She's a professor of behavioral ecology at University College London, and she loves wasps and wants us all to love them too. Professor Sumner, okay, so we need to make sure to not spray down those wasps' nests. It's such a hard word to say. I mean, maybe that's another reason why people hate wasps.
So actually, the reason people hate wasps, and it's definitely true that people do hate wasps, the reason they hate them is that people don't understand what they do. And so I think, as I said, they're really important pest controllers. They're really important in population regulation of insects. And I think in the same way that we tolerate bees, we love bees, not because they're just cute and furry, but because we know that they do an important service for us. We should love wasps too, because they do an equally important service.
You also did some research about how wasps could potentially benefit medicine. Could you tell us about that?
So that's not research of my own, but we did find this in our big review on ecosystem services offered by wasps. And so, there's two key areas in which wasps could be important for medicinal sciences. And one is their sting. So the very thing that people hate wasps for is possibly the source of a lot of, it's like a pharmacological cocktail bar, if you like. And that's because the venom, particularly for the solitary wasps. So let me tell you a little bit about solitary wasps. So solitary wasps are lone wolves. They hunt a particular type of prey. So it could be a spider, it could be a caterpillar. And then using their sting, they will paralyze that prey and carry it back to a burrow and bury it under the ground, usually, or in a pot they might have made. And then they'll lay their egg on it and they'll seal it up and say bye-bye. That's as much parental care as these offspring get. And so then what that happens then is that egg hatches, and then the larva, which is the carnivore, will munch into this paralyzed prey. And then it will live off, that prey will provide it with everything it needs to develop into an adult. So if you think about it, Mum has basically provided a living larder for her offspring. And she needs to be really sure that that food stays fresh and it doesn't get diseased. And so the way that she does that is by having these amazing chemicals within her venom, which she injects into the prey. And parts of those venom, as well as being really clever neurotoxins to paralyze the prey, they also contain antibiotics. And those antibiotics have been shown to be effective against bacteria that that are common pathogens for humans, like Streptococcus. And all the different types of solitary wasps tend to be very specialist in the type of prey that they hunt. And by being a specialist, they probably have different composition of their venom, because they have to be really good at paralyzing that caterpillar or paralyzing that spider and keeping the bugs at bay in that caterpillar, or keeping the bugs at bay in that particular spider. So again, it's this co-evolution of a very specific cocktail that's been honed by evolution such that it's optimal for keeping prey fresh under the ground. And the antibiotics are a really important part of that.
So we could harness that and take that wasp, their natural antibiotic that they have, and use that to create a new kind of antibiotic for humans?
Potentially, yes. I mean, it's surprising because there is a reasonable amount of research on this, but none, to my knowledge, in terms of actual clinical application. So I think it's a whole untapped field. So if there's any, microbiologists out there who are looking for a new niche in the markets, I think solitary wasps might be an area of great interest.
Okay, I think you're starting to convince me a little bit to like the wasp.
So there's one other potential medical medical benefit for from wasps, and that is a potential cure for cancer. And there's literally it was like 2 or 3 papers on this, so it's very, very, very little research on it. But again, it comes back to the venom, and there are specific peptides within the venom that are called mestoporins, which are have been shown under lab conditions, at least, to target cancerous cells and destroy them, whilst leaving healthy cells alone. And so I think that the research is obviously very much at the beginning of the, of being anything useful. But there is the potential there that they could be used for a treatment of cancer. Although I understand that it's quite difficult to be able to get those particular peptides to the cancer, so it destroys the cancer cells and not healthy cells. And that's a whole area of biochemistry that is a field in its own right. But it's kind of exciting, if you need an excuse to tell somebody not to swat that wasp, you say, hey, stop there. Those guys might be really good for curing cancer. We don't know.
Okay, got it. Now I know what to say. Sarian Sumner is a professor of behavioral ecology at University College London. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing more about the wasp with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm Ciara Hewlett. This is Top of Mind.
Top of Mind is a production of BYU Radio. Ciara Hewlett, Cleon Wall, and Kyle Remond produce the show. Today's episode was curated from Top of Mind's vast archive of past conversations. I hope you enjoyed hearing some of our favorites. You can find more, lots more, from Top of Mind on the free BYU Radio app. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon.